thank you for being here. I wish more people were here, not for a selfish reason, but because our next guest is going to bring it all. He can't do anything but. I just met him for the first time in person, backstage. But it's going to be interesting because I'm going to bring a lot of dynamics that I didn't know I was going to bring into the conversation, because I think it's very important for people to realize that your personal role within your organization could not be more important than it is today. We've talked about a lot of times, it's the people that matter. It's the leadership that matters. It's can you bring it every day with a focus on the North Star to reach that goal. And at the end of the day, it's not about technology that's going to get you there. It's about the people. That's an unusual introduction for my next guest. Lamont Young is from Citizens Bank. It's a bank, if you're not familiar, in the northeast part of the country that competes with the biggest banks. There's a presence in that region where they are of all 5, or actually all 10 of the biggest banks in the country. And so we're going to talk about how do you break out of that mold? How do you differentiate your organization through better personalized services? How do you identify what differentiates one consumer from another, one segment from another, one market from another? So we're going to get to that right now with Lamont Young from Citizens Bank. So, Lamont, I don't think I've ever done an introduction like that before, but it's interesting because I am really fortunate on this podcast and with the Financial Brand Forum to meet amazing people that many times you can identify almost instantly what drives them, what makes them special. Give me a little background. What is your background, not just at Citizens Bank, but going before that?
Yeah, funny enough, my background's not in banking. My background is actually in fashion. So when I finished undergrad, I moved to New York and actually worked for fashion brands for my first couple of years out of school. The whole banking thing, candidly, Jim, is just sort of sheer dumb luck. I had the opportunity to do a startup early on in my career. I serviced actually some of the banks in the Southeast. And when business got a bit soft, I had an opportunity to join B of A, focused on their small business segment. And that's literally how I got into banking. Funny enough, I thought that would be sort of a bridge job for me for maybe a year or two, and it's turned into a 17-year career in banking.
That's kind of crazy, you know. Not people. That's not an aspirational goal in many cases. You probably, when you're in fashion, you go, you know what? I'm hoping I can do really well so I can be in the banking industry.
Exactly.
You know, I mentioned that Citizens Bank is in a hyper competitive environment. You're not the biggest bank in the region. You're not the smallest bank, but how does Citizens Bank, on a general basis, differentiate their brand among the giants?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it all starts off with people. Banking is, whether we like it or not, it's a people-based business. Digital or not, you're serving humans at the end of the day. Our CEO, Bruce Van Saun, always talks about banking being a noble profession. The fact is, when you remove all the statistics, you remove all the financial reporting, what we help customers do on a day-to-day basis is achieve lifelong dreams, right? That young couple that's gonna buy their first home, right? Banks enable that experience to actually happen. Some kid who was gonna be the first in his family to go to college. The services that we provide as financial institutions help to make that actually happen. When families are in crises, like we are amongst the institutions that are there for customers. So this is inherently a people-based business. And I think the way we differentiate ourselves is the reminder that we have the services that make us the type of organization that can support large, small businesses, can support consumers across the board. But we've got a small enough feel, we've got a nimble enough nature to ourselves that we can feel like that hometown community bank.
So you said when we started talking backstage that Citizens Bank has made it a mission to serve each market, each segment, and actually each consumer individually, with a recognition that the branch in New York City is not going to be the same branch that is in Providence, Rhode Island, or the same bank that's in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah.
So when did that mission, or when did that focus on that level of humanization and personalization come into play?
I honestly think it started back in 2014 when we did our IPO from RBS. So Citizens was a wholly owned subsidiary by the Royal Bank of Scotland. We IPO, we're the largest IPO in largest bank IPO in this country's history back in 2014. And I think our CEO, Bruce Van Saun, and the senior executives back then sort of said, we've got the makings of a great bank. We're in probably the wealthiest corridor in the US, playing in the Northeast and portions of the Midwest. From a products and services standpoint, we had the type of products and services that could, again, help complex commercial businesses all the way down to your general everyday consumer. But what we didn't necessarily have is the people and the culture to create a really great bank. And I would tell you over the course of the last decade or so, we've infused a lot of talent into the organization. We've also cultivated talent that was already there, that was just sort of yearning for that opportunity to sort of break out. Customer experience is an absolute mandate. We look at each customer on an individual level. I would say if you look at particularly the scores that we have around NPS for our customer-facing platforms or colleague-facing platforms, they're off the charts because our people really do believe in the service-based model. And I think so the last thing that I would say is, if you look at what we've done in New York City over the last couple years, New York City is a microcosm of that hyper-local strategy. There are a bunch of folks who a couple years ago thought we were insane for trying to be a regional bank to penetrate the market that is New York. But to your point, we treated New York like we treat all of our markets. We wanted to make sure that we became a part of the communities that we actually serve. We hired folks that were from those communities. We treated Brooklyn differently as a borough than we treated the Bronx. We treated the Bronx different as a borough than we treated Queens. And that hyper-local strategy has really allowed us to create, I think, a really strong hold on New York and build a really strong brand presence in the toughest market in the world.
So it's interesting. My podcast and our articles of the Financial Brand tends to feature Citizens Bank, I'd say as much or more than any other organization for a couple reasons. Number one, they have a great PR team that continues to reach out to us saying, hey, would you like to talk to this person about this subject matter? Secondly, and you mentioned the acquiring, the searching out, and the cultivation of some amazing leaders. Mm-hmm. I'm a watcher of the industry. That's what I do for a business. And one thing that interested me, and you mentioned your IPO, Citizens Bank at that time, I would say was an underperforming institution from a brand perspective, if nothing else. I'm not talking financial, but it was hard to define how were they different than anybody around them. Through the acquisition of new people, through the integration of people in the culture as it trickled down, I don't think I've interviewed anybody from Citizens Bank that just didn't awe me in one way or the other in their passion for what they do, their enthusiasm for what they do. And it made me realize and remember, as I tried to introduce you at the beginning of mine, that you really have to love what you do to do it well, because it does transcend the organization, especially at your level. I say that because in order to implement a brand new strategy, a brand new focus, a brand new customer focus, and to change so much so quickly, the leaders have to be aligned, and they have to be enthusiastic. They got to bring it every single day. So when you started with Citizens, you said you're at that transition point when everything was new again. What was the organization's first mission at that time? The reason I'm giving this foundation around the whole segmentation issue is because it all builds on each other. It builds from the ground up. So what was the focus of the organization at that point?
So I think if you were to look at us maybe 12 years ago, I think we underserved clients across all of our segments. So we were one of those sort of sleepy-based banks that provided just enough of a solution set, but certainly didn't have that feel where, whether you're talking about investing in products and services, allowing our colleagues to have the tools that are required to service clients well, we just sort of did things good enough. I think fast forward to the IPO, and there was a vision of where the bank could go. Our mission to really help our clients across all the different segments achieve their financial goals was our sort of laser focus. And if you look at how we galvanized folks who had been Citizens lifers to reinvigorate that culture, if you look at how we infuse strategically good, strong talent from the outside, 12 years ago, I happened to be one of those sort of folks. I think that was the sort of formula that was necessary to take a bit of a sleepy regional bank and sort of make us a bit of a powerhouse nationally. Although, we play that regional bank role from a size and scale standpoint, we compete nationally. We've got a footprint that covers all 48 contiguous states. If you notice what we've been doing over the last couple of years with the advent and scaling of our private bank, I mean, at a time where most banks were actually playing a bit of a defense, we decided to go on offense and take a stark opportunity to really build out a private bank. And we happened to report earnings today, and the private bank was one of those sort of cornerstones or highlights of our earnings reports this afternoon.
So that being said, and during the process of defining your brand and what you wanted to be, what your North Star was, we were going through digital transformation, the beginning of truly digital banking, more than just the mobile app. What was your focus as an organization for how you balanced the technology stack with the human stack?
Yeah. I think the most important thing for us is recognizing that we as an organization, we're going to make a long-term bet on a hybrid strategy. We knew that the industry was going, especially when it comes to retail customers, the industry was going more self-service. And we went as the industry went. But we also recognized that clients, regardless of how they engage with us, wanted to have experiences that were unique across the board. My entire team exists because the bank actually believes in an omni-channel solution, and we want to provide that same level of wonderful digital experience for customers, whether you go into one of our branches, you call us on the phone, or you actually handle your business with us via self-service tools.
So we've set the foundation. And a lot of our focus now is, everybody's looking to acquire more customers, to build more relationships. Most importantly, how do we make it so we don't just have the account, especially the legacy accounts, because people won't close them.
Absolutely.
But they may be gone already. I mean, so when you look at the expansion, you've already mentioned what you do on the branch level to make it so that you really try to hyper personalize around the environment you're in. But when you look at the new segments, and we're going to talk a little bit about Gen Z and Gen X, what have you done for these very unique segments? And I think more unique than we thought they were, because it's not defined by how they bank as much as how they want their bank to serve them. How are you doing that?
It's an interesting sort of view of these particular segments. Oftentimes when you think about Gen Xers and baby boomers, it's sort of how do those segments actually fit within the banking ecosystem? I think it's the exact opposite for millennials and Gen Zs. It's how does the banking ecosystem fit into their lives versus the sort of other way around? I think for us, it starts off by understanding sort of the needs of these segments and treating them the same way we treat our markets as sort of individuals. I've had conversations with peers across our industry about the sort of advent of personalization, and that's a buzzword that I think you guys all hear, probably 6 ways to Sunday. But personalization without the other 2 legs of the stool, in my opinion, is where I think banks miss the boat. So when I think about the 3 legs of the stool, it's not just personalized. It has to be highly contextual, and it has to be very, very timely. And let me give you a perfect example from my own personal life that sort of brings this to life. So I've got 2 boys that are in college, one going into this fall his senior year, the other who'll be going into his sophomore year. And I've gotten all sorts of communications from brands trying to sell me on, student loan packages and that sort of thing. So that is personal, right? So they know enough about me to know that I have college-age kids. But that's only step 1, right? When I talk about something being contextual, if you knew that my oldest son is an athlete and is on scholarship, you'd recognize you probably shouldn't send me anything about financing his education because it's already taken care of, right? If you knew about, our savings habits for our youngest son, fact of the matter is, God willing, there'll be enough money in his 529 plan to actually get him through 4 years of school, right? This is where not being contextual, I think, misses the point around personalization. And the timeliness is, imagine if you had started these conversations with me and my family 7 or 8 years ago, before the boys got into school, right? Imagine how you could have cultivated that relationship with us over time so that if we did need extra help in finance education, we could do that. And so I like to look at the way in which we attack Gen Z and millennials is by really making sure that our experiences, our conversations, our interactions with them are not only personalized, but they're contextual to the individual and they're highly timely. Or as my kids say, don't tell me about something that already happened. Tell me about something that might happen so I can do something about it.
Well, anybody who's seen me over the last 3 days realize I reference the GPS in the car quite often saying, you can't just tell it to go north, but not just tell me the route. Be sure to remind me when I got to take a detour because something's happened ahead of me. Give me the straightest place because I don't want to think about it. I go back to the map days. I mean, I go back to where we're looking at paper. You're making phone calls to the payphone. All these things that no longer exist. the reality is you talk about contextual engagement. You talk about contextual serving of the consumer. We don't know those answers intimately. So the fact that they communicate with you knowing that you had college-age children is one thing. How does Citizens Bank try to build that knowledge base that takes it to the next level rather than just getting a surface view of, the consumer based on an age and maybe the fact that, oh, geez, we know they have kids?
So we've invested heavily over the last couple of years in data and analytics, being able to gather publicly available information on our clients without being creepy, I think is one way in which we've made experiences feel that much better for our users. For instance, a couple years back, we tried to revamp the entire home equity experience. So any of you guys have gone through and done a traditional home equity is probably one of the most cumbersome processes that you would go through. And it's a cumbersome process whether or not your incumbent bank who holds your mortgage is your provider of the home equity or if it's a third-party bank. So we just sat back and sort of reimagined the entire experience, right? Availability of home values is like no other time in sort of American history. I can find out the value of almost any home in the U.S. by going on ChatGPT right now. And so we said, hey, if
home they're getting from Zillow,
and they're getting from Zillow and everywhere else, right? Yeah. And so if home values are available and we can make estimates on the estimated equity in a home, why should we have an application process that takes customers through that entire process of understanding what that loan to debt ratio is on a home? And if we can figure all that out and we actually understand the credit box of our clients, shouldn't we be going out and proactively offering credit from a home equity standpoint for those customers that are eligible? And so we took a process for us around traditional home equity that would have taken on an average between 30 and 45 days. And now our our home equity fast line product, candidly, we can close many of our loans in 48 hours or less. So taking a process that felt really cumbersome, really paper-based, and making it very digital, making it very slick, we not only matched the needs of our clients, but we exceeded those needs across the board.
Boy, you talk about the whole mortgage process and the whole loan process, and I got great stories. Where a financial institution only paid attention to my mortgage that I had way too long at the old rate, at a high rate. They only paid attention when we were going to be getting a small place in Florida. And then they're all over me going, hey, we want to help you. I said, guys, you weren't here in my refinancing. Guess what? When I got the small place, we decided to refinance the existing home, and you're losing that mortgage. What you thought you didn't want to stir up the hornet's nest, now it's gone. Yeah. And that whole dynamic, the getting information from multiple places and building a story around it. Is there any future in banking to be able to ask questions and actually apply that? So the finding out of, geez, you didn't take this. Is there a reason why you didn't? And making it easy for a consumer to have interactions with you that shows, it's not getting creepy if you're going to give me value as opposed to putting in the file cabinet. Is there ways to do that in banking, do you believe?
So we started a process a couple years back that we call sort of the checkup process. And checkup was designed like you would do if you went to a doctor's office. It was a health check, right? So the notion was not for citizens to either digitally or in person to try to find that next cross-sell opportunity. It was really about making sure that from a financial health perspective, we had the healthiest customers possible. The healthier our customers, the more likely they are when they had a financial need to actually sort of choose us. What our checkup process helped us do is over the course of time, uncover needs for our customers. Go back to that same conversation that we just had about my kids being in school. Maybe there wasn't a cross-sell opportunity for us 6 years ago when I had that checkup conversation, but maybe 2 years from now, that is the right time. The only way in which we can actually have that sort of warm lead, the only way we stay at the top of the consideration set for our clients and even some of our prospects is to cultivate that relationship over the course of time. And when I think about particularly millennials and Gen Z, this is what these folks actually want. You don't necessarily capture them, especially if you're a traditional financial brand, at that sort of first step. Most of what Gen Z and millennials will tell you where they get their financial information is not necessarily from traditional banks. They're online, they're getting their information from influencers, so forth and so on. But if you can be one of those institutions that provides that nugget of information that helps me feel good, that takes away some of the anxiety that I actually have about my finances, and over the course of time, you can build a relationship with me, you can be one of those institutions that is at the top of the consideration set when I actually have a good financial need. And that is our strategy. It's about building long-term relationships with clients, providing value at every turn. And we think we can actually grow with clients over the course of time. And we look at our Gen Z and our millennial population no differently.
Well, it's interesting because we see in banking today that while we think we have the customer as a secure, loyal customer because they've been around forever, we don't dig deep enough to realize we have the account in some cases. It's too hard or it's just too cumbersome to close it. I don't have to close it, open another one. And I certainly don't have to close it, open relationships beyond my traditional financial institution. What does Citizens do to try to stop what I'm going to call the silent attrition that's happened to every financial institution, but we don't pay attention to it? Whatever it is, financial institutions say, I got only a 2% attrition rate. I go, that is not going to make me feel good, but you know where that money's going every paycheck. How do you do that?
So passive churn is a real sort of thing across all financial institutions, large and small. I think the challenge for institutions is to sort of recognize what are those triggers that begin the process of sort of passive churn. I think, you would have sort of rolled the clock back 10, 15 years ago. Most institutions would have told you, hey, if we can get customers in these sort of sticky products, if I can get you get you into a checking account, I can get your direct deposit, if I can get you into bill pay, these are all things that are sticky services. Candidly, they're really too difficult for customers to actually sort of switch. Today, I can actually switch my direct deposit in seconds. I can switch my bill pay over in minutes. Like, those things that you would consider traditional sticky just aren't there. We use some internal complex algorithms to take a look at the propensity models of people that are likely to attrite. We use that information to sort of engage with those customers to understand how do we correct those behaviors that actually lead to that, sort of passive churn before that passive churn actually happens. And in some cases, it is as simple as providing the customer with a value-added insight. Something as simple as, hey, we see that you've got multiple transactions for the same service on your account. Here's how we can actually save you a buck. And none of you guys have seen any shortage of commercials out there where there's some banking app that's offering you the ability to cancel some subscription service. That is good, right? Because it's personalized. But I still go back to the point, you've got to get really highly contextual. So great, you can cancel that and you can save me $150 a year. But what does that $150 actually do? Can I invest that money over the course of time? And this is where I think some of the fintech players do very well. If you look at the way, Acorn and Betterment and some of these other apps do over the course of time, talking about fractional shares and all these sorts of things, like they do that very, very well, where it's not just a personalized component, but how do I take it to the next level where I make it very highly contextual and how I make it very timely to me? And so that's the journey that we find ourselves on. I'd love to say that we're 100% there, but I think we're on a very strong journey to build relationships with clients over the course of time and build lasting relationships with clients over the time.
So your boys,
yeah,
they both probably went into a branch once to open their accounts, and I would imagine probably Citizens Bank.
Okay.
And they have not walked in since, and their transactions are probably more driven by Venmo and by maybe a credit card that they got earlier in their college life that somebody got them all hyped up about this. How do we get that consumer? How do we understand that consumer, number one? But even more importantly, how do we make it so that they believe we're looking out for them as opposed to simply trying to pick up a fee or a rate or a new product?
Yeah, it's a great question. But I would say this is sort of the benefit of being a part of a bank and having a customer's primary relationship, because you already have all the data that you actually sort of need on it. So if we were to mine my boys' accounts and all the activity that they do. So my youngest son, who goes to school in Metro Atlanta, he goes to Clark Atlanta University. Like, if you would scour his accounts, you would see a bunch of DoorDash passes for food that he's eaten around campus, right? And so sort of know, hey, this kid does not like the dining hall at Clark Atlanta University. He's calling his father every week for more cash so he can actually sort of eat out, right? Well, what does this mean about?
So I'm going to interrupt you. The good news is he gets that immediately. I'm sorry, back in my day, I had to plan a week ahead of time because I'd have to call up my parents on a collect call. They'd say, oh, he's not here. They'd call me back. I ask for money. They send a check. It gets deposited on a Thursday. I can't get it cleared until Monday. So I have to plan ahead when I need those books.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But I will say, my kids will say they have to plan ahead as well, because it's like, well, hey, I need the money at 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, and I know Dad is in some meeting, and he's not going to check his text messages. So do I call him and interrupt this meeting? And he sees it like, so they still do that. But my point is, the richness of data that we have on the accounts of our clients is no shortage of world class. The challenge for us as institutions is not, do we have the data? Is, can we actually make the data usable so that we can provide those very contextual, relevant experiences that I think the Gen Z and Millennials, and candidly, guys, anybody who is what I would consider a digital native, right? Digital natives come in all forms. There are boomers, there are Gen Xers like myself across the board, but like, that is the value of being able to take data, cleanse it, hydrate it, synthesize it so that you can be relevant and contextual. My oldest son, even though the two boys grew up in the same household, same parents, whatever the case may be, could not be any different than his little brother. My oldest son is an athlete on full scholarship, and so if you look at all his purchases, they're all for like supplements and stuff like that. Whatever the case, they're the same, but they're sort of different. And so if you were to communicate to my two boys in the exact same way, because they're brothers, you would miss the point of being very contextual and relevant, right? So where my oldest son, it may be about making sure that he's got, discounts on the services that he needs in order to, make him this world-class athlete. For my youngest son, it's about, the fact that he's cramming for studies at 2 o'clock in the morning. He needs food for that sort of brain power. Like, getting down to that level of detail, candidly, you have that at your fingertips. The hard part about it is making that data usable to be able to go out and proactively talk to your customers.
Well, and it's interesting because we sometimes take it to the 20-yard line and let it go there, where we say, at least we know about the customer. I get frustrated. I say it on way too many of my podcasts. It's one thing for my bank to know me. It's another thing for them to show me they know me. Mm-hmm. My business bank knows how much I need on a monthly basis and how much I use, what I do on my business basis. Basically, only that they're a deposit warehouse. My personal bank knows about me. They know a lot more about my transactions. But neither one of them are my primary financial institution from a mindset. My business bank is PayPal. My other bank, I'd say it's Acorns. Yeah. I built more in savings through Acorns than I ever did for my bank. Now, what's really frustrating to me is on twice a month basis, I transfer money from my business bank to my personal bank. Because my business bank does not use the service that makes it easy to transfer, I transfer the money by taking a picture of a check twice a month. I'm now doing it out of spite, just to see which bank is going to notice this happens all the time, and you're going to come to me with a better solution. Mm-hmm. It's what I did when I bought my car. I said, I know they know when I'm test driving, because there's a way to get data from the credit bureau. Because I know, because every dealer, every manufacturer is after me immediately, but no bank said, I want to finance you. Mm-hmm. The bank that did finance me was a floor plan loan at Ally. And since then, they've continued to try to build my relationship on a personalized basis. Mm-hmm. I say that because the way funds flow can tell you a lot. Does Citizens Bank pay attention to funds flow to figure out who your competitors are or who your clients' competitors are?
Yeah, it is a fundamental cornerstone of our entire enterprise payment strategy, to recognize inflows of funds, to recognize outflows of funds, and to try to be that interface that the consumer engages with when they want those funds to sort of flow. I've had probably many internal talks about this particular subject. The last thing we want to do is to become the holding bank and have another bank own the experience for sort of clients. Exactly what you're sort of talking about. My kids, and you're exactly right. If you look at the traditional services that they utilize to move money, it is the Venmos, it's the sort of Cash Apps. I had a funny conversation with my youngest about, why do I even need a bank account? Just put everything in Cash App, and when I need the money, I can send it out. When I need to get money, I go back in. I think over the course of time,
and you tell them,
yeah.
I work for a bank.
Yeah.
I'm still paying your bills. You're staying with the bank.
But more importantly, I tell them over the course of time, your needs are actually going to change. So, your needs as a ninth grader in high school were going to be different than his needs now as a 19-year-old in college. Your needs as a 22-year-old when you actually graduate are going to be completely different. And this is where this whole notion of earning trust and building relationships with the clients, especially your Gen Z and millennials, because you don't get the benefit of having that sort of trust be inherent right away. Like, I know for me, there was no question because of how my parents bank,
Right,
that I was going to go to sort of traditional bank. My kids have so many choices that I didn't have sort of growing up. And so the need to be able to create long-lasting relationships over time becomes really, really important. It's also important in that I think Gen Zs and millennials are comfortable with a much more fragmented banking experience than their predecessors. Again, that doesn't mean they're the only generations, because there are folks who are digitally native who don't mind at all spreading their banking relationship over multiple institutions. Again, I think what you don't want to have is, you don't want to either be the institution where you're just the holding bank, where you don't actually own that relationship with the client. And that's what we're trying to do at Citizens over the course of time. Own those relationships with clients individual, day after day, by providing really sound advice, whether it comes through digital channels or physical channels. And at the end of the day, being proactive in terms of our communication to customers, allowing us to let customers know what likely will happen and giving them an opportunity to do something about it before it actually does happen.
So let's take the Gen Z generation. I think, what have you learned at Citizens Bank that surprised you about the Gen Z, without taking your sons into context, within the broader sense?
Yeah. So it's funny enough, like you read a lot about the fact that they are so likely to look for sources of financial information outside of the traditional banking ecosystem. That said, Gen Z will search for human-based advice, but that advice has to be earned over the course of time. So it's not like they won't talk to a human, but they're more likely to want to explore, because they've got so many places where they can actually sort of gather information. So it's not that I won't listen to Jim, but I want Jim's advice, and I want to scour the internet, and I want to find a bunch of different sources to be able to compare them. So what I think has been really, really surprising for us is that, like, they're so much more open to listening than I think we give this generation actual credit for. And this is why I go back to our conservative strategy of saying, like, hey, if we can just give them a couple of clear nuggets of information, something that can actually help to start that trust over the course of time, when their needs become more complex, we can be one of those places where, they turn to directly. I think the other thing that's very, very surprising is that amongst Gen Zs, like, they are what I would consider the sort of entrepreneurial generation. There's so many members of this generation are graduating from school, whether it's high school or in college, and their first thought is, I don't want to necessarily go and work for a large institution. I want to start off and I want to be an entrepreneur. I had the opportunity to sit with a few startups over the last couple of weeks, and just the mentality of some of these sort of burgeoning entrepreneurs is so much different than when I was in college in the late 90s.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because we find that the way they educate themselves is vastly different. Yeah, they're going to school, and you feel kind of lucky as a parent when your kid goes to school, because you go, I know they could have learned a lot of this through YouTube, and that sounds unusual, but there's already challenges about, could they get a better education by searching out themselves? But it takes a different kind of person too. From that perspective, as you look in the future with Citizens Bank, from the retail consumer standpoint, as you're doing, what do you want to be able to accomplish on behalf of your consumers, your customers, in the next 2 years? What do you want to have at your fingertips that today is still you're working on?
So I think customer experience for us is one of those never-ending journeys. Given the fact that our approach is going to be sort of hybrid digital and hybrid in person, I think what we're on sort of an evolutionary journey to do today is to take that awesome sort of empathy that exists in your human-assisted channels and apply more of that to your sort of digital channels. I am the first to sort of say, at some point in time, whether you're a large bank or you're a credit union, 95% of your transactions that happen with your retail consumer base are going to happen over a mobile phone, a mobile app, desktop banking, you sort of name it, right? But if you think about the hundreds of billions of transactions that banks and credit unions do, that 5% or less that isn't being done via self-service, it's still a ton of transactions. Or as I've said to a bunch of folks in our organization, if the next 3 years we do 1 billion transactions and 95% of those transactions go through self-service channels, that's still 50 million transactions that a human is actually engaged with, which is why our approach of not selling those human-assisted channels short is so incredibly important. I think our evolution is going to be one where we take that awesome sort of empathetic view that you can have when you're dealing with a customer, when you're dealing with a colleague, take that and apply that principle to what we do within digital. 5 years ago, I had the privilege of starting our journey design practice at Citizens. And, regardless of the client job to be done, like we spent a lot of time really thinking about the moments that matter in any process and ensuring that we get those moments that matter right all the time. Anybody here in the mortgage business will tell you in that entire mortgage process, there's one moment that absolutely matters, and that is closing. You screw that up, you screw the entire thing up. And so we look at our moments that matter just like that. What are those places that are inflection points in a relationship? Even if you think about something as simplistic as being able to make a fraud claim, the complexity in how consumers are thinking at any given time, how they're feeling, your ability to provide that really good empathy could take a moment like fraud where it feels like it's a negative and actually turn it positive because you feel like your bank has gotten your back. So that is my vision for what I hope that we're going to be able to accomplish over the next couple of years to not only make the technology and the client experience seamless across the assisted channels and the digital channels, but bring that real empathy to that sort of self-service direction, making sure that our communications, I make sure our language feels like you're a human talking to another human, even if it's just an interface.
How do you let the marketplace know that you're doing that? Because it's great for your existing customers to feel that way, but when you're looking to get new customers, you're looking to grow, we all talk the game really well, even if we're not providing it. We're all talking about personalization. We're all talking about empathy. I want to look out for the consumer. When you reach that goal to whatever level, how do you let the marketplace know that that's available?
Yeah. So I'd say it all starts off with, is your brand authentically what you're trying to sell to the consumer? You started off this question talking about Citizens pre-IPO and talking about the infusion of both talent from the outside and the cultivation of internal talent. And I look at the journey that we're on as an organization is much in the same way. The things that we actually do, us going into New York City at a time where people thought this bank was crazy trying to attack New York, this sort of focus that we have on building a private bank at a time where most banks are playing defense. The things that we do at Citizens, I think, are authentic to the leadership teams that are there. They're authentic to the personality of, our 19,000 associates. And so, the way in which I think we're going to let customers who don't know us today know is by continuing to have that authentic brand, that feel of, hey, we are big enough to support any complex need that you actually have, but we are small enough to focus on you as an individual. We're winning relationships with small business because of that strategy. We're winning relationships with our private banking clients from that strategy. And I think we'll continue to expand out and win relationships on the retail side of the house with that same kind of hyper focus on being ourselves, and ourselves is really trying to help clients achieve the best of their financial futures.
We'd all like to think this has been a straight journey, that you've gotten better every day. You had the leadership. What's the biggest challenge that you face at Citizens or in banking in general that kind of keeps you up at night? Because it's a challenge that it's the static, it's the friction, whatever else towards your journey.
Yeah. I would say if you put any of my peers who are heads of digital or otherwise at regional banks, what they'll tell you is that the toughest part of the job is, generally speaking, most regional banks like ours are built on a series of acquisitions, right? So it was, this bank that used to be independent has now become a part of Citizens in this bank. And so if you look at the technology stacks of most regional banks, they're an amalgamation of a whole lot of stuff, right? I think the biggest challenge for all of us is going to be, how do you walk and chew gum at the same time? How do you deliver the types of experiences that are required to bring out the results that you and I just talked about? But at the same time, how do you begin to start to modernize your back office, modernize your tech stack so that those things become seamless? What the neobanks have as an advantage over your traditional banks is they don't have the legacy technical debt that I think we actually have. And so I won't say that keeps me up at night anymore, because we've got a fabulous CIO, we've got a strong engineering team. I think we've onboarded some of the best and brightest of engineering talent, and I think we got the right strategy. But it is one of those things where you could say to yourself, man, if we were only 10 years ahead, or we're only 5 years ahead, imagine all the really cool stuff that we could actually do for our clients.
But that takes focus. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, and shameless plug here for the podcast, is that I suggest that people look at our podcast and find out how many had Citizens Bank in it and listen to all of them, because the one consistency and all that, and you keep on referring to it, and I think you take it for granted because you came in at the time when all this was taking place, was not how smart your leadership is, not that they're not, but they are, but how passionate they are, how focused they are, and how they're all singing from the same hymnal. The reality is, if the leadership is not in place that says we're going to change the world, and if it didn't come from the top, it would not work. And I think the organizations that I interviewed, that I see, that are doing the best in the industry are the ones that have the passion. The Jennifer Smith from 2 days ago from Zions Bank, the Liz Wolverton from Synovus, who comes with it all the time with both guns of barrel because of the passion they have. I think that's a very important element because it gets you where you want to go faster than it would by technology alone. Because it's not a technology game as much as it's a human game. Finally, looking forward, looking ahead, what do you get excited about as far as the future?
Uncertainty, if that is a thing that I could sort of talk through. The uncertainty of waking up every day and understanding that the marketplace could change, new opportunities could come up is, I think, the thing that sort of drives me. And it's probably a very, very weird answer to what I think is a very straightforward question from you. But I actually enjoy the uncertainty of knowing that our industry is in such a moment in a history of real flux. That uncertainty, I think, provides banks with opportunities that I don't think necessarily, if you were to roll back, banking 20 years ago, even before I started in the industry, I don't think banks took advantage of. Like I've jokingly said to a bunch of folks, like if banks were on our game, firms like PayPal would not exist, right? Square would not exist.
Acorns would not Acorns was a Christmas club plus a monthly savings plan. Yep.
Absolutely. And that uncertainty, coupled with the fact that I think we now take a look at sort of the technology firms, fintech, you name it, as less of an individualistic threat and more of a push to provide better experience, but two, as potential partners that can actually help us elevate it. And that uncertainty, we had dinner last night with a group of entrepreneurs who were trying to solve an old adage problem, which is around sort of youth-based banking. And it wasn't that somehow the broader idea that they came up with was necessarily new, but their approach to the idea was new and exciting. And I felt the energy and passion. You talk about passion within our group, within our leadership team. I think that's the thing that sort of sets us apart, right? New leaders, existing leaders, folks just aren't afraid to start to think about the world in a bit of a different state. We have an internal process that I believe is probably second to none in the industry, where we get comfortable around doing what I would consider very respectful challenges, right? How many of you guys have been a part of an institution where something was done the same way for the last 30 years and nobody feels empowered enough to challenge that? I think we've got an internal view where we feel like as key leaders, we can respectfully challenge each other, and it doesn't feel like I'm challenging your intelligence. I'm just thinking about the idea, because trust me, that thing that's been in place for 30 years, somebody thought it was a good idea at one time or the other. Doesn't necessarily mean that idea can't be improved on.
It may have been the only idea. I mean, I look back to the signature card days, which was before your days in banking, but we only got rid of signature cards when somebody said, all you have to do is to know your customer. You can do this differently with digital. Digital gives us a lot of capabilities. I think it's interesting because you talk about the uncertainty. Satish from Ally said, what makes him excited is knowing that there's 25 young guys and women around that could upend everything that Ally is doing in about a 3-month period through digital. He goes, I'm hoping I'm staying ahead of that, but the reality is, he found that not as a challenge. He found that as, man, that gets me fired up every day, because that's what I'm fighting against. I'm fighting against the unknown. Lamont, I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate getting to meet you and get to understand more about who you are. And we hope you keep your sons as clients of customers of Citizens Bank, because they're looking. Thank you
so much.